Do you ever notice how some people become quieter over time, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have seen too much to explain easily? They do not react the same way anymore, they do not trust the same way anymore, and they do not open up the same way anymore, and there is always a reason behind that change. People who have gone through too much rarely show it all at once, because what they carry is not loud. It is layered, heavy, and often invisible to others. On the surface, they may seem calm, distant, or even cold, but underneath there is a history of experiences that slowly reshaped how they see the world. Psychology tells us that repeated emotional strain does not just hurt in the moment. It changes the way a person processes trust, safety, and connection. That is why these people do not simply move on, they adapt, and that adaptation often looks like distance to those who do not understand it. At first, they were probably open, expressive, and willing to give, but over time something taught them that giving too much comes at a cost. It was not one event, but a pattern, something that repeated enough times to leave a mark that could not be ignored anymore. When someone goes through too much, they stop reacting quickly, not because they do not care, but because they learn that quick reactions often lead to regret. They begin to observe more, speak less, and measure people through consistency instead of words. This change does not happen suddenly. It grows quietly as they realize that not everyone who speaks kindly has kind intentions. They start noticing the difference between what people say and what people do, and that awareness slowly replaces their old way of trusting. Psychologists often describe this as a shift from emotional response to controlled awareness, where the person becomes more cautious without fully realizing it. It is not fear that drives them, it is memory, because memory reminds them what happened the last time they trusted too easily. That is why they take longer to open up, longer to respond, and longer to decide who deserves access to their inner world. People who have gone through too much do not lack emotion. They just learned how dangerous unguarded emotion can become. They feel deeply, but they reveal selectively because experience taught them that not everyone knows what to do with someone else's vulnerability. This often creates a misunderstanding because others may see distance where there is actually self-protection. When someone has been hurt repeatedly, their mind starts to scan for patterns, for signs, for anything that resembles what they have already survived. This does not mean they are negative, it means they are aware, and awareness often replaces innocence once it is lost. They no longer assume good intentions automatically. They wait, they watch, and they let time reveal what words cannot. Psychology explains that this is the brain trying to prevent future pain by learning from past experience, even if it makes connection slower. Because of that, they often prefer silence over unnecessary conversation and solitude over forced interaction. Not because they dislike people, but because they are tired of energy that does not match what is being said. They have seen too many situations where words and actions did not align, and that disconnect becomes something they cannot ignore anymore. This creates a low tolerance for inauthenticity, where small inconsistencies feel louder than big promises. When you have gone through too much, you stop chasing excitement and start valuing stability, because stability becomes something rare and deeply needed. You begin to understand that peace is not something you find outside, but something you protect from being disturbed. That is why these people often appear less reactive, because they choose carefully what deserves their energy. Psychologists often note that emotional fatigue changes priorities, and people begin to value calm over intensity. They are not uninterested, they are selective, and that difference is something many people fail to recognize. Another important change is how they deal with disappointment, because they no longer express it the same way. Instead of reacting immediately, they withdraw, observe, and process internally before showing anything externally. This is not weakness, It is a learned response that protects them from making emotional decisions they might regret later. Over time, they develop strong internal boundaries, even if they never speak about them out loud. They know how much they can take, what they will not tolerate, and when to step back without explanation. That quiet boundary becomes their strength because it allows them to move without constantly defending themselves. People who have gone through too much also become more comfortable being alone, not because they prefer isolation, but because they trust their own space more than unpredictable environments. Solitude becomes a place where they can think clearly, feel safely, and exist without needing to explain themselves. Psychology shows that self-reliance often grows in those who had to process life on their own without consistent support. They learn to validate themselves, to solve their own problems, and to create stability from within instead of depending on others. That internal stability changes everything because they no longer look for someone to complete them, only someone who does not disturb their balance. Because of that, they take longer to trust, but when they do, it is not shallow or temporary. They value depth over speed, consistency over charm, and truth over comfort. They also become less impressed by appearances because they learned that what looks good on the surface can hide something very different underneath. That awareness makes them harder to deceive, but also harder to reach because they do not respond to things that once attracted them. Psychologists explain that repeated emotional experiences refine perception, making a person more accurate, but also more guarded. They begin to notice patterns in behavior, tone, and timing, things that most people overlook in everyday interaction. This can make them seem distant, but in reality, they are simply paying attention at a level they did not have before. Another change is that they stop explaining themselves to everyone because they realize that not everyone is meant to understand them. They become quieter about their struggles, not because they do not have them, but because they learned that sharing does not always bring relief. Instead, they choose carefully who they open up to, and even then they reveal slowly, piece by piece. People who have gone through too much do not fear connection, they just respect what it costs. They know that opening up is not just talking, it is trusting someone with parts of themselves that are not easy to carry. That is why they do not rush, and why they step back when something feels unclear or unstable. Psychology reminds us that the mind is always trying to protect itself, even if that protection looks like distance to others. These people are not avoiding life, they are navigating it differently, based on what they have already experienced. They do not need constant validation, constant attention, or constant reassurance because they learn to stand on their own. That independence can be misunderstood, but it is often the result of having no other choice for a long time. When you go through too much, you either break or you rebuild yourself in a quieter, stronger way that others may not recognize immediately. And those who rebuild do not become louder. They become clearer, more careful, and more intentional with everything they allow into their life. If this made you see things differently, like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel.